Men of War 2 was such a strange playtest for me. It's been quite a few months since we actually got our hands of an early open beta, and that everybody pitched in their 2 cents to say what they thought about the game. And it seemed like best way we're going an interesting route. You see, we haven't had a mainline Men of War game since Assault Squad 2. That was all the way in 2014. So it has been about time for the main series to come back. Of course, Call to Arms has filled in that niche for now, and having the World War II expansion is fantastic, but I have really waited for the main series to make a return. So when Men of War 2 officially changed from being a Men of War arena to a new mainline game, I was excited. But then we actually got to play the open beta, and it confused me a bit. And my first question was, who is it actually for? You see, it's very casual and it's incredibly arcadey, and you can see that this is just coming off the back of them creating Men of War Arena. It was supposed to be a free-to-play, online-only kind of Men of War game that never really went anywhere, hence them pivoting and changing into a mainline game. Yet it had all the pedigree of that title before. The arcadey UI, the weird mechanics of things blowing up and tanks feeling like paper, and not having the in-depth detail of armor penetration and weapons and ammo that you had in an Assault Squad 2. And I didn't really understand where they were coming from, because the audience for Men of War is the opposite of arcadey. What is the most popular mod for Assault Squad 2? Well, it's Rob's Realism mod, which already in itself isn't that arcadey as standalone. But when you put a mod like Rob's Realism on it, it makes it way more realistic. Not just mechanics, but especially the gun physics, and it completely changes the gameplay style. And if this is the most popular modification, why aren't new Men of War going that way? It seems Call to Arms was their attempt to go in that direction, but of course it's a different development team and almost a different game series entirely, just very lightly linked to the series. And Call to Arms Gates of Hell Ostfront is the closest that we have to a decent comparison. We've got very good reviews at the moment on Steam, so let's actually have a look at why. People calling it the king of RTS games. Its massive part is the focus on micromanagement. You need to focus on a unit to put them in a good position, but also be aware of other units on the battlefield. It also has an editor where you can create maps and scenarios for yourself, and this is such a huge genre on YouTube. But it is these refined game modes like Conquest and the attention to detail when it comes to the infantry or the armor, each faction having so much unique historical accuracy, and that's what people love about it. It has a plethora of campaigns to explore as well. And of course, what Call to Arms introduced, that first-person game mode, being able to zoom in and actually play as individual soldiers. Gates of Hell and Call to Arms are incredibly popular, and they're popular because of their focus more on the realism. This is also why Assault Squad 2 is the most popular Men of War mainline game, because of its realism, because of its attention to detail and micromanagement. I mean, Company of Heroes, especially Company of Heroes 3 that we've just recently seen, has not gone that direction, and you can see the effects of it. The series has gone downhill because they lent into arcade. People that love World War II games aren't necessarily the same people that love arcadey real-time strategies. I mean, if we actually look at Men of War 2 and what we got to experience in the open beta, you could call in airstrikes every 2 or 3 minutes, and having massive teams of players, 8 on each side, there were airstrikes going off everywhere. This meant that it was almost impossible to hold down positions. If you had people in buildings, which is an amazing feature of the Men of War series, being able to channel people down streets and putting infantry in windows, now you just couldn't, because if you did that, an enemy would just call in an airstrike. Then if it was on a cooldown, then someone else would. Tanks also had health bars. I mean, what's with this? This is completely the opposite of anything that the Men of War series had done before. The whole fun of a tank and having armor in general within the game is to use your knowledge to know exactly how to take this thing out. Okay, so we've got a Panzer IV here, so what's the best way to do it? Well, if we have anything lower than a Sherman ourselves, we're not going to be able to do any damage from the front, so we need to make sure we're flanking, maybe hitting it in the tracks, or even taking out the turret if we can get a lucky shot from behind. Even using things like Greyhounds to skirt around the side, or to put a bit of armor penetration in the rear. There was no health bar, so you could never know if it was going to work, and that was the risk. Can you get around with a faster and nimbler tank, or can you sit at the back with something like a Pershing and just pop shots off, just hoping that your armor is stronger than theirs and that the distance is correct? Using distance and armor penetration to calculate the ways to take out enemy armor. That was what made Men of War so popular, and it's strange to me that Bestway, the people that really are surrounding this series, have forgotten that. Taking direct control of a tank almost turns it into a game like World of Tanks, you know, the incredibly arcadey popular MMO. It's fine when it's in its own game, but for a Men of War title, direct control wasn't about creating an entirely new game in itself. It's about giving the player more micromanagement. So when you direct control a tank in Men of War 2 and it turns into this arcadey, weird viewpoint mess of a game, it completely defeats the point of it. It was used in certain scenarios, whether you're cooking grenades or trying to skirt around a bit of debris in a tank to get behind an enemy vehicle in time. It was never the go-to way to play, only complementary. And then it comes on to the UI in general. One of the massive complaints of the open beta was how arcadey the UI was. Not just things like having in airstrikes or the health bars on tanks, but also hit markers and certain boxes that show up. You have segmented UI to highlight which parts of the tank that you should be hitting in order to actually destroy said tank. And it will tell you if you don't have the armor penetration to do that. Yeah, it makes it easier for a new player, but the whole point was to actually get your knowledge of this game up, to make this a competitive title for people that were into history, that had learned the armor penetration and the certain points to hit in a tank. This is an audience that the Men of War series has never catered towards. The fact that we're making it a hold hand focused game is an audience that is not existent within this franchise. You also, when selecting a group of men, cannot put them in specific windows. You have to just select your lads and say, go in that building, and they'll hopefully clear it out and get in the right places. You can't put men in maybe the top one because that'll be a better point, or maybe you put them in the wrong window and they don't have a good shot. That's all part of the micromanagement, and this just seems like a theme. They've taken out a vast amount of the micromanagement from Men of War 2 to replace it for easier to access stuff for new players, to make it faster maps and quicker game modes, to get that modern day style of gaming, which is jump in, play a quick game and jump out, rather than immerse yourself in this World War II experience, an RTS like no other. And that's how Men of War has carved out its space. We've seen the downfall of the Company of Heroes series, and Men of War haven't learned from that. Hopefully they are making changes now, because they're really going to need to. There wasn't much of a positive reception for Men of War 2. We can even see this on the latest release date trailer that they released for Men of War 2, bringing out the fact that we're going to actually get our hands on the game on September 20th. We have a full release date now, but even so, there were quite a number of dislikes, and whilst this trailer actually showed some promise, it's an interesting question to bring up. You see, this trailer completely hides everything to do with the arcade UI. It's showing off something that actually looks a lot like a Men of War Assault Squad 2. And of course, there is a mention of why hasn't the UI improved much from 10 years ago. But hey ho, at least it looks like they know what the community want, and they're leaning towards that direction. We do actually get later on in the trailer a look at the UI, and it is still way more arcadey and cluttered than I ever really hoped for. And Jesus Christ, these battles just look absolutely hectic. But it does look like health bars on tanks have gone. That is something that I'm hopeful about. And boy, they just need to keep going in this direction. Announcing something like 20 plus player maps is a massive red flag for me. But I really want to know what you think. Do you think the larger scale and the more mainstream dilution of the franchise is a good thing for Men of War? Or is it just another company that have taken something good and tried to change it into something, well, normal? Taken all the things that make it special and reverse it back into a diluted, de-engineered version of itself. Because it looks like it's going that way, and unfortunately, that's kind of sad.